Hello and welcome to another episode of Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. Let's deal with threats. Threats. Not any specific threat, but people who seem to habitually threaten others. Threats! Welcome to the wonderful world of threats. Threats are not nice. They can cause anxiety, fear. They can drive people crazy, literally. They can cause terrible turmoil, which is really, it's the opposite of peace. Moral, loving Christians are supposed to be peaceful people. They're not supposed to create turmoil. And that's what threats do. So, threatening is fundamentally an immoral, evil behavior. You shouldn't be a person who constantly threatens people. You shouldn't be. If you are, there's a lot of four-letter words that people are going to call you behind your back. And not to mention the least of which is evil. Threatening people is evil. It's evil. And that sort of person is a sad person. It's really a despicable sort of person. Shameful, despicable, immoral, you name it. That sort of individual is not a desirable person, not the least bit, not a moral person. It's an evil person. But there's a lot of people like that out there. A lot. So, let me talk a little bit about the threatening sorts of people that there are out there. And what they do and maybe what you can do about it, if anything. I just want to, the first thing I should say is it's not good for you to be in a relationship with the sort of person who constantly makes threats. That's not good for you. Mentally, emotionally, physically, that is bad for you. So you should run away from these people. Your best defense is not even be around them. Kick them off your island. If you unfortunately run into these sorts of people, try to get away from them. Get them out of your life. That's the best solution. Keep them out of your life. If you don't have to worry about threatening people, your life is going to be a lot better. Now, sometimes you have no choice. You could try working on a lifestyle or having some sort of, independence or financial independence such that you don't need these sort of threatening people in your life. You can work towards that, and if you achieve it, your life is going to be a lot better than if you have these people in your life. So that's a good goal to have. But in the meantime, you may not be able to do that. You may have these sorts of people in your life. Now, these sorts of people are often in positions where they're always threatening people. So, one clue to avoid people like this is to avoid people who are in positions where they constantly threaten people. Because you can bet if you're having dealings with somebody, whose job, for instance, involves threatening people a lot, they're going to threaten you eventually, and you're not going to like it. So, what are the professions that, have people who threaten other people a lot, right? Well, you got the bill collector, right? The bill collector. But there's others. There's, lawyers. Some lawyers are professional threateners. That's really all they do every day is threaten other people on behalf of their clients. Police officers threaten all the time. Teachers, coaches, even parents. These are certain areas where there's a lot of threatening going on. If you're involved with one of those sorts of categories of people, watch out, because they're going to start threatening you and make your life miserable. So you may want to avoid those sorts of people. Good idea, really. Military, they threaten a lot. So, if you're dealing with military personnel, it's a good chance they're going to start threatening you at some point. Employers, oh my God, employers. There's some employers that threaten constantly. Some employers feel that they're not doing their job properly if they're not threatening every day. That's a big source of constantly threatening sorts of people. So, if you own your own business or you're financially independent, you don't have to deal with employers. Count yourself lucky, so you don't have to deal with this nonsense and these sorts of evil characters here. So, when it comes to threats, there's two different types of threats. There's idle threats and there's real threats. Now, there are plenty of people who engage in idle threats constantly. That means these people are paper tires. Right? You've heard of this person's bark is worse than their bite. These are paper tigers. These are people who make idle threats. Now, there are, a lot of people who make idle threats. And the reason they make idle threats is because they know that they don't intend to go forward with their threat, but they're banking on the fact that you probably don't know that. So you may be taking their threat as real. So you'll find there's a lot of people who are just full of idle threats because they know people are probably going to think it's a real threat. And because of that, they'll give them what they want. But most people who threaten engage in idle threats. They're just hoping you don't figure out that their threat is not real. So, if you're dealing with a real threat, you got to take that seriously. How do you tell the difference between an idle threat and a real threat? The person who's threatening you certainly wants you to think it's a real threat, but 9 times out of 10, it's an idle threat. You could probably safely ignore it, and nothing will ever happen. So how do you tell the difference? Well, you got to look at the person who's threatening you. Ask yourself things like, well, does this person really have the power and authority to do what they're saying they're threatening to do or implying that they're threatening to do? Do they? Well, there's a big hint that it could be a real threat. I mean, if they're able to do what they're saying or implying that they're going to do, you should take that as a real threat. But a lot of people make all sorts of threats, and they hope that you believe that somehow they have the authority or the power to do it, even though they know they don't. But that's up to you to figure out. Otherwise, the threat works for them. So you figure out, is this an idle threat? Is this a real threat? One of the defenses you can use against people who threaten you is simply ask them straight out, are you threatening me? Because people get put off by that question, especially if they are in fact threatening you. because no one wants to admit that they're threatening somebody, even though that's exactly what they're doing. So you ask them, are you threatening me? Chances are they're going to say no, even though they are. Chances are they're going to say no, and that's going to put them on their heels. That's one easy defense against people who threaten you. Some of these people who make threats, they're really nasty, manipulative, passive-aggressive sorts of people. Um, not the kind of people you want to invite over to dinner parties. These are really some of the worst people that you'll ever run into. And my suggestion is stay away from them if you can. But if you can't, and you got to deal with them, think about, what kind of, is this a direct threat? Are they directly threatening me? Or is this some sort of implied threat? Are they suggesting some sort of threat but not saying it out loud? If they're not directly threatening you, it's probably an idle threat. Because, they don't want to be caught threatening you directly and out loud, and then everybody realizing that they're a paper tiger and they really didn't have the power to go through with their threat. So with idle threats, you'll get a lot of implied threats, subtle threats, passive-aggressive threats. That's usually an indication that you're dealing with a paper tiger, somebody who can't really do what they're saying to do. But, the thing with threats is, you've heard of the carrot and the stick, right? Use the carrot and the stick. The threat is the stick portion of that. And the thing with sticks is they're free. You can pick them up off the ground for free. Carrots are much more expensive. So people like to use threats because they're cheap. They don't cost anything. And they can be extremely effective. So if you're dealing with very cheap people, employers fit in this category a lot. Chances are they're using threats a lot because they don't like to spend money. So what do they use? They use cheap threats. Doesn't cost them anything. It's just words. And it gets people to do what they want. So you can, cheap people who are trying to make money, expect a lot of threats from these people because this is inexpensive. It doesn't cost them anything. It's a cheap stick. A carrot is expensive. You got to buy a carrot, or you got to go through a lot of effort to grow it and pull it out of the ground. Wait 6 months. Sticks, you just pick them right off the ground, and you got something to hit somebody with. So threats are cheap. They're cheap, and that's why you see a lot of them. So you gotta get skilled at figuring out, is this a real threat or is this an idle threat, and who is this person anyway, and do they have the power to go through with this, and should I just ignore them? You can ignore a lot of threats. Just ignore them. One of the manipulations these people like to use to give their threats more power is they like to put you in fear and then threaten you. So any way that they can put you into fear is going to make their threats more receptive, more believable. Because fear makes your mind irrational, and you're worried about things, and then they threaten you, and then you think the threat is real or much more serious than it really is, and you don't figure out, can this person really go through with this threat, or is this just this person's just blowing smoke? So one of the techniques is, hit you with fear. And then use your threat. This is a very powerful combination. It's also very cheap. And you'll see this used all the time by threatening people. Employers love this one. Put you in fear and then give you the threat. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll put you in fear, they'll give you a threat, but then they'll also give you a way out. So this is sort of like the good cop, bad cop scenario, right? So you got bad cop here and good cop here. Right. So they put you in fear, and then they give you the threat. That's the bad cop, but then they give you a way out. That's the good cop. So they put you in an emotional state so that you're gonna cozy up to the good cop, and you're gonna do the good cop thing for them. Um, it's a manipulation. It's used all the time. Be wary of it. It's cheap. It doesn't cost people anything to do this, really. So that's why they do it all the time. They're nasty people, but it's free. So they do it all the time, and they think they're smart. Um, Creating fear is the best way to set somebody up for manipulation. It is. So any way they can put you into fear, it's going to set you up for manipulation. So, if you get a shot of adrenaline, right, that's fear. So be wary of any sort of situation where you get a shot of adrenaline, right? That fearful state. Wonder who did that to you? Did they do that to you on purpose? Maybe they did. Manipulators, threateners, will do that. They'll try to get you to have a shot of adrenaline before they give you their threat. However they accomplish that. There's, a million different ways to put somebody into fear. So you can be extremely creative in how they go about doing that. But they're purposely doing that. They're doing it on purpose. They know. They know chemically you're much more susceptible to manipulation and threats if you have a state of fear, if you've had adrenaline go through your body. However they figured out to get you in that situation. They know this. And it makes you more susceptible to doing what they want. It's a manipulation. Okay. There's also two other types of threats. There's indirect threats and direct threats. Indirect and direct threats. A direct threat is where it's clear that you're being threatened. If you don't clean up that floor, you're fired. It's a direct threat. But people use indirect threats, I think, far more than they use direct threats. And the reason for that is because they don't want to be considered uncivil or unfriendly, even though they're threateners and they really are uncivil and unfriendly. But they want to kind of hide it, so they act indirectly, or maybe they're afraid of your response because they don't know what you're going to do to them if they threaten you directly. You may flip out on them, and they don't want that happening. So they're cowards, so they're going to use an indirect method of threatening you. Indirect methods also allow for plausible deniability. So even though they did intend to threaten you, but it was in such indirect terms that they could claim, oh no, I didn't threaten you. No, that wasn't what I was intending to do. So it's a way for them to escape responsibility for what they said if things go wrong. Because when you threaten people are unpredictable. Things can go wrong. So there's a lot of benefit to using an indirect threat than a direct threat. So you'll see indirect threats from these sort of people far more, I think, than direct threats. So is it an indirect threat? Are they indirectly threatening you? This is a tough call because it depends on the circumstances and what they said, or maybe what they did, and it's one of those difficult things to know for sure. And they're not just going to come out and tell you directly what that they are threatening. So they may want you to come up with that thought in your own mind. There's a lot. If you run into passive aggressive people, you'll see indirect threats a lot. Passive aggressive people are very aggressive, but they don't do it directly, so it's not obvious. They do it indirectly, usually because they're cowards. They're fearful people. They're cowards, and they don't like direct confrontation because it could result with them getting a broken nose. So they do it indirectly. They're cowards. They do things indirectly. Passive aggressive behavior is the hallmark of a coward. But nevertheless, and you'll see that a lot among these sorts of threatening people. So if you see passive aggressive behavior, good chance you're dealing with a person who likes to threaten indirectly. Um, you know, a lot of these threatening people have clearly emotional problems or some sort of psychological problems or personality disorders. Uh, you'll often find them among narcissists, uh, people who it's all about them. They're in love with themselves. You'll find them among like psychopaths and sociopaths, people who don't display empathy for other people. They don't care about other people at all. They don't even seem to notice the harm they're causing to other people. These are sociopaths, psychopaths. You can find them among employers a lot. This lack of concern for their fellow human being. That's criminals. Yeah, criminals. They can have emotional problems and have them threatening people a lot. Highly intelligent people who know how to manipulate others can use threats a lot. Uh, uh, these people just can't help themselves really because they can be very effective by threatening, and they know how to do it, and so they do it. Lawyers, a lot of lawyers fall in that category. Highly intelligent and using threats a lot. Nasty people, a lot of nasty people. Not all lawyers are nasty. I'm a lawyer. I'm not nasty. But I know a lot of nasty lawyers who fall right in this category. So I speak from the truth. Let's see. If you're unsure about whether you're actually being threatened or not, and that can happen, because if you're dealing with people who like to use indirect threats, sometimes it may just be a coincidence. Or maybe they didn't intend to threaten you, but it felt like a threat. In that sort of situation, but then again, maybe it is a threat. Ask yourself, do I feel threatened? Maybe even ask them, are you threatening me? I know that's a very blunt question to ask somebody, especially an employer. But what's the worst that's going to happen to you? Ask them. Maybe you put them on their heels if they're actually threatening you. Ask yourself, do I feel threatened? If you feel threatened, then there's a pretty good chance somebody's threatening you. indirectly. If it was direct threat, of course, you would know whether they were threatening you. Passive aggressive people are some of the most difficult people on earth to deal with because they don't tell you the truth. They always make it seem like everything's fine, but passive aggressively, they're tearing into you and doing all sorts of threatening things. And you could just be, it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The person who's actually communicating with you seems like Dr. Jekyll, but what they're doing behind your back or what they're doing indirectly is like Mr. Hyde. And those sorts of two-faced personalities just drive you crazy because you never know where you really stand with them. And some of them have emotional problems, mental problems. And with those sorts of people, there's no fix for that. You're probably better off leaving or getting away from them. But passive-aggressive types are just so annoying. Those sorts of people are so annoying. And you can't fix them, and they're so used to being this way that they're always going to be that way. And it's really just annoying. You're better off not having passive-aggressive people in your life. You really are. If you can get rid of them, get rid of them. These people trying to indirectly tell you things about how displeased they are because they're wimps, because they don't want to say it directly, because they're afraid of the consequences. That just, if you're going to be a wimp and not say things directly, then don't be passive-aggressive. Just drop it. Don't drive everybody crazy. But they can't. These passive-aggressive types drive people bananas. They'll drive people bananas. They'll drive you bananas. You're better off not having them in your life. Avoid them. Lots of times these threatening individuals will try to enlist others into their threatening plans, whether indirect or direct. But understand that most people don't like to be that involved in somebody else's plans for threatening somebody. I mean, it's not really their fight. And they may feel as if they're forced to somehow be involved with this plan, but they generally don't want to be involved in it. So if this threatening personality has enlisted others into their threatening battle with you, understand that most of those people probably don't even want to be involved in it, but this person's forcing them to, but their heart really isn't in it. So I would be less concerned about the other people that this person might enlist in the threat. Because that person, chances are, it's not their battle. They probably don't really care all that much. They're just sort of forced into it. So their heart's not into it. So don't worry about them too much. There's only one person you really have to worry about. That's the person making the threat. That's the person. And, these sorts of people also have people that they can use to do their dirty work. And they pull strings. These sorts of people can pull strings and have others do their dirty work. And don't blame the messenger. The person who they have doing their dirty work isn't the one who's responsible. It's the one. It's this one, the higher up, the one who's really making the threats that's responsible. So when you think about threats, make sure you figure out who is the one who's actually making the threat. Lots of times in indirect threats and passive-aggressive people, they don't even want you figuring out that it was them who is causing the threats. They want you to think it's somebody else, a patsy, for instance, right? Because they're such cowards, they don't want any retaliation against them specifically. But they're not willing to drop it. So, when you feel threatened, make sure that you know where it's coming from. Because that can be a difficult thing to figure out, especially if this person has, if they have underlings or they have some sort of group that they have some puppet mastery over or some control over. They could send emissaries out to do their dirty work. So sometimes you got to think about, well, who's the person who's actually making the threats? Maybe they're hiding for cover. They don't want you figuring out it's them. They do that a lot. I mean, because why not? Because they want to make the threat, but they don't want any retaliation or consequences. Because they're true cowards. So how better to avoid consequences than to hide the fact that you were the one doing it, right? So if they can hide that fact, they'll do that. But understand that's their motivation. So you can figure out usually who's the one really behind it. Who's this person's making a threat, but who does this person report to? Who's that person, and who's that person report to? You might be able to figure out who it really is, who's really behind this. Sometimes it's obvious it's the person who's making the threat. Clearly, 9 times out of 10, it's the person who's actually making the threat is the one who's behind it. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes they're hiding. They're hiding somewhere. And you got to be careful about that and figure out who it really is. Another thing with threatening people is, they never seem to give up. They are persistent, and persistent. So if you think you're going to get them to give up by, let's say, retaliating or counteracting them, or outsmarting them this time, there's going to be another time. So they're exhausting. Threatening people are absolutely exhausting people to have to deal with, because they just don't give up. There's something about, threats are cheap and they're on a power trip or they've got some sort of emotional problem and they just love it. And they don't give up on it. So they're just going to continue to threaten you. Chances are they'll just continue to threaten you. So you might stop the threats this time. Well, if they're going to continue to threaten you, you try to figure out, is this a paper tiger? Is this somebody who engages in idle threats, or is this somebody who has some real threats? If it's just somebody who's incredibly annoying, but because they're full of idle threats, well, then you may want to just ignore them. Just ignore them and go on with your life. Just realize they're not going to be able to do anything to you. They're going to be annoying, but they're not going to be able to do anything to you. So just forget them. Just do whatever you want. Ignore them as if they didn't even exist. If there's somebody who has authority to really go through with their threats, their real threats, and they're significant threats to you, then I would say get them out of your life, because that becomes a dangerous, annoying person to have in your life. You don't want that in your life. These threatening sort of people they've got problems to begin with, so it's not a great idea to have them in your life anyway. They're just going to make it worse. You always try to improve your life, not make it worse. Getting these people out of your life is definitely going to be an improvement. There are some people who their entire modus operandi is threatening people. They do everything as a threat. And they gain leverage through their threats, through which they negotiate their deals. There are people like that. That's all they do. They just threaten. They threaten all the time, not just you, everybody else. This is their method of getting what they want. They threaten and threaten and threaten and try to create leverage through the threats to get you to do what they want or pay you less than you otherwise should have gotten. These sorts of people hire lots of attorneys. And they view attorneys simply as people to do their threats for them. So that's why they hire attorneys. This person's just I'm going to use this person to threaten other people and create the leverage I want so I can negotiate a better deal for myself. there are people who live life that way. These are very sad people. They're evil, nasty people. Um, they may think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread, but they're horrible people, really. And but they're there. They exist, and there's not much you're gonna be able to do about them, except try to avoid them with all cost. You know, their mindsets are they're just in the gutter. They're horrible people. You don't want to go there. You don't want to be friends with these people. You don't want to behave like them. That's no way to enjoy life. They're just nasty people, and they like being nasty. Get that out of your life. Don't have that in your life. Certainly don't marry it. Good God. Um, some of these people, all they do is threaten it. And then if you say no, some of these people think, okay, I'm going to threaten you 10 times as much. Right? Because, that's their solution. If their threat didn't work, threaten even more. Let's move up the scale of threats. I'm going to threaten you 10 times as much as I did before until you cave into my threat. Escalate the threats. Because when you're you're a person who just threatens for a living, basically, and your threat doesn't work, then what do? Right? Well, one thing you can do is you escalate the threat. Let's make the threat even worse so that you finally do what we tell you to do. Lawyers do this constantly. Escalate the threat. Some of them just start off with a ridiculous threat, ridiculously absurd, nasty threat, thinking that you're going to think the threat is so horrible that you'll just cave like that. And they do it on purpose. They know they don't have the capability to go through with their threat, but they think you don't know that. So why not just start off with the worst threat you can think of, and you'll cave immediately. Some people behave like that. Other people threaten, and then if the threat doesn't work, then they start escalating the threat. But they rarely just drop it. Threatening people, they threaten for a living, so they rarely just drop their threats. Now, they could be idle threats, and you can safely ignore them. Or they might be real, in which case you better not ignore them. But you'd have to know what kind of person you're dealing with. There's tons of people who love this method of getting what they want, threats. But they can't hire lawyers. They don't have any money, and they don't have any real power or authority. But they can gain power by threatening other people. They're idle threats, but the other people may not know that. So there's a lot of people with low self-esteem who love idle threats. Because it's a cheap way for them to feel powerful. Until you figure out that they're a paper tiger and these are idle threats, and you just start ignoring them. And then they don't feel powerful anymore, so then they go threaten somebody else. You find a lot of immature people engage in constant threatening people. Like toddlers, Oh, you didn't give me what I wanted. Now I'm going to threaten you. I'm going to cry about it. I'm going to be a baby. A lot of insecure people. They want power. So they're going to cry and threaten until they get what they want. So a lot of immature people, these people who threaten a lot. A lot of them are very, very immature human beings. And you got to ask yourself, well, why do I have this incredibly immature adult in my life? How is that a good thing for me? And the answer is usually it's not. So get them out of your life. You should. Why should you deal with people like that? They'll just drive you crazy. Teddy Roosevelt said, speak softly but carry a big stick. Right? He was the bully, the bully president, right? Some of these people, they carry a big stick, and if it's a real threat, watch out. Even if they're speaking softly, they got a big stick, keep an eye on that stick. How big is that stick? Is it a little twig? Or is it a real stick? You got to be careful of. You may not know, because the person's speaking softly. You don't know what kind of stick they have. Or, maybe they're screaming at you, but that doesn't mean they have a big stick, right? So you want to find out about how much is this a real threat or is this an idle threat? If you can find that out, that helps a lot in dealing with these people, seeing who you're actually dealing with. Okay, I think that's about it for threatening people. This is, it's unfortunate that these people exist, but you will run into them. Remember, threats are cheap. They're cheap. And that's why some people do it constantly, because it's a very cheap method of getting what they want. And once they get a power fix on that, the people start doing what they want just by threatening them. They do it more and more and more and more. And they become very uncivil. They're uncivilized, immoral people, but they're on this power trip, or they have low self-esteem, and they're just not going to let go of it, and they're just not going to be nice people, and they're not going to return to morality. But you're going to run into them, and it's better to be, warned in advance. So I guess that's what I'm doing for you. All right, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you like what you heard, please press the subscribe button. And don't let anyone threaten you. Because if you do and you let them threaten you and you do what they say, then they're going to know that you're a whip and that threats work against you, especially idle threats. Don't ever don't ever act on an idle threat, please. So be tough about it. You got to be tough with people who threaten. Because the second you cave, they're going to do it again and again and again and again, thinking you're going to cave. So, show some strength and don't be a coward when dealing with threatening people. That's probably one of your biggest defenses against them. Don't be a coward. Call them on their threats. Retaliate against them. Sometimes you got to retaliate against these people to get the message across to them that you're not going to cave into their threats. So be tough about it. All right. Take care.